Hi, folks. Thought a little soothing music was in order this morning. Welcome to Resistance Live. It's the 11th of October, 2023. Um, and as always, I am Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin, also known as ECM. Thanks everybody for being here. I'm seeing our usual friends from Germany and Sweden. I learned yesterday we've got a bunch of viewers in Australia. Grateful to all of you also in Toledo and Pittsburgh and Empire, Michigan, and Sanger, Texas, and Portland and Northern Montana and Chapel Hill. So good to see our wide-ranging audience here this morning. As always, I am coming to you from occupied Tongva land in Southern California. I was asked a question about this yesterday, and I just want to mention again that, land acknowledgement is not only a way of reminding everyone of the history behind the land that we live on and American history. It's also a way of just acknowledging that that the land is not ours. And it's something that is happening routinely these days in activist communities. So I've had a couple of questions in the last couple of days about land acknowledgements. My kids have a land acknowledgement at their school that they do before every school event. And it's something that kind of consistently has taken place in countries like Canada, but has not really taken on much here except in activist communities. And I think it's really important that we all start doing it, and way beyond just Indigenous Peoples Day. I am a woman using she, her pronouns. Today, I am wearing, for our visually impaired viewers, a gray kind of like slightly high collared sweater. My hair is pulled back. My smaller hoop earrings are in gold. I am a pink skinned, dirty, blonde, green-eyed woman, and I'm really tired today. And my voice is a little scratchy because I also think I managed to get dehydrated between yesterday and today. So my apologies for the little bit of a vocal imprecision this morning, but I'm really glad you're all here. I had a tough time titling today's broadcast, which is why I went with, for those of you who saw it, the idea that this is the most upsetting news cycle that we've seen in recent memory, because it is. And I have to say that I continue to just be personally devastated by the ongoing breaking news out of Israel and Palestine. And, I think that I have to reiterate that I think the murder of civilians and the deaths of civilians on both sides is just horrifying. I also want to remind everybody, in case you missed it yesterday, that there was breaking news in the New York Times yesterday about the fact that Hamas is posting video footage of executions on social media and taking advantage of loopholes, particularly on formerly known as Twitter, to do that in ways that are actually monetized. It's very, very bad. And there's also routine footage of executions and beheadings and the like that is being posted on Instagram, in some instances to the victims' own social media accounts using their phones. So I just want to remind everyone here, first and foremost, because I got a very urgent text message about this from a friend of mine who's a very senior official in tech. I'm not going to identify her, but she's a viewer here. About the fact that we need to get our kids off of social media right now, just flat out, full stop. My kids are not on any social media platforms, but I did have a conversation with them this morning, as well as a few days ago, about the fact that they are not to be watching any videos on TikTok or Instagram right now. And that if anybody shows them anything or tries to show them anything, that their response has to be, I'm not allowed to look at that. I really want folks to be very mindful of the fact that there is footage circulating right now that you can't unsee, and that will traumatize you, and that will traumatize our children. And you are not under any obligation to watch it. And in fact, there are indications, and this was what my friend in tech said yesterday, that this is actually an op on behalf of Hamas, where they are doing this intentionally to terrorize Jewish people. And I don't want anyone to be engaged in circulating it or viewing it, let alone without your consent. So, yes, Elon Musk got a warning letter yesterday from the EU Commission about the fact that he is allowing this stuff to circulate on Twitter, X, without any moderation whatsoever. my suspicion, he's got a deadline to respond to that. My suspicion is that Twitter is going to be cut off in the EU in the event that he does not take action. So I am just really, as I'm sure, I know all of you are, like, very, very upset about all of this. And I don't know how you couldn't be. I think wherever you might have found your perspective in advance of recent events, um, the horror of this is overwhelming. And so I just want to remind everyone here that it is okay to not be on social media right now. And in fact, some of the folks that do their business on social media, who are friends of mine, are not logging into their platforms right now. I do not want anyone to think that that part of bearing witness requires you to self-traumatize. And I will just say that, some of my friends who also are former intelligence officials, people like Travis Akers and others who shall remain nameless, have, told me in the past and have mentioned, Travis said this yesterday on Threads, that in their roles, they have had to watch things like the footage that has been circulating recently, and they are traumatized when it was a part of their job. And they were trained to cope with it. So I just really want everyone to please take care of yourselves. I feel like this is what I've been saying for a long time here, but particularly over the last couple of days, like, please take care of yourselves right now. Like, mind your central nervous systems, log off if it is overwhelming, because it is overwhelming. Okay. And it's not like the news is not going to be there if you choose to log off. All right. And you can always watch here, because I'm not going to be sharing any of that stuff, as you all know. And I really just, I want you to be very mindful of your kids and your grandkids and everything else. Someone, when I posted this last night on Thread, said, well, I just asked my daughter and my daughter isn't seeing any of it. Well, the fact that your daughter isn't seeing any of it doesn't mean that it's not out there and that it's not circulating unmoderated. And that this is the other thing that my friend who works in tech said yesterday. These are loopholes that social media companies are unprepared to address. Okay. So, like, they're being exploited. There's no way for them to pull them back effectively. And this is intentional. All right. So, it's very, very important to protect yourselves and protect your loved ones from seeing things that you just can't unsee. All right. There's breaking news this morning on this front. I'm just going to share the top headlines. Again, I am no expert on the Middle East, but I want people to be aware that there is now a coalition government that has been formed in Israel as a result of the crisis. Just a few minutes before I went live, there were sirens and warnings in northern Israel that hostile aircraft had entered from Lebanon. So one of the things that I'm just very concerned about right now is the ongoing escalation of this. And there are negotiations underway right now with Egypt and Israel and the United States to try to create a pathway for civilians in Gaza to leave, and for a potential ceasefire for 6 hours so that process can be begun. But if this is Hezbollah engaging in flights over the northern part of Israel in conjunction with Hamas, that is a very significant escalation that adds more violence and more instability to the circumstances. And we don't know right now where things sit. I want everyone to understand that, there needs to be a means by which on every side, civilians are not subject to further violence. So, and again, I'm not diminishing anything that has happened at the hands of Hamas. I want to make it really, really clear. It's horrifying. And also, there is no solution that includes the ongoing murder of civilians. That is not something that actually is going to lead to a solution here. So I want folks to just take care of themselves today and understand that there are ongoing escalations here that are extremely disturbing. And everyone that I know who has family in the region, both Israel, I have friends who are Israeli, I have friends who are Jewish who have family in Israel right now. I have friends who are Palestinian who have family in Gaza right now. It is a moment of profound trauma. And I was thinking about this last night, just on the front, that, like, in some sense, while we can avoid the video, there is no way at this point to avoid the trauma of what people are experiencing. And so I want to encourage people even in the process of the trauma, to not lose your humanity. I mean, and this is something that folks like Josh Gad, who has been very vocal as, a very prominent Jewish celebrity in the last few days on Threads, has been encouraging everyone to remember that these are civilians. Civilians in Gaza, civilians in Israel who have been murdered and are being subjected to unspeakable violence and harm. It's just, it's hard to wrap one's mind about it. And the most critical thing that we can do as people who care is to maintain our compassion and our humanity. And one of the ways to do that is to, if you find yourself having tremendous feelings of vengeance and overwhelm, to log off. And so I want to encourage people to really do that. I want to encourage people to take care of themselves, to take care of their loved ones, to make sure that you are not losing your humanity. Because this is a circumstance where, by the way, that is a part of the purpose of the kind of violence that we have seen in Israel. It is designed to make people so angry that we lose track of our sense of who we are. I just have to point out that, one of the things that national security officials, like Naveed Jamali, for instance, have pointed out in the last 24 hours is that the strategy here in circumstances like this, if possible, is to figure out exactly what the enemy wants and do the opposite. All right. And here, these attacks were very clearly designed to provoke retaliatory violence that is unbelievable. Like, again, remember, the Palestinian people are not Hamas. And I know there are debates about how many members of Hamas were elected and the like, but there are women and children, right? Babies, tens of thousands of people now who have been displaced within territory that they are not allowed to leave. And the circumstance of this is such that it is really critically important that if you are in a place where your desire is to wipe another part of humanity off the map, and your rage is such that you cannot come back to a place of understanding that that is not an answer, I really want to urge you to log off. Because there is no solution that can be found in ever escalating violence and death. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about Biden's speech yesterday. His speech was incredibly compelling. And again, I have to remind everyone that it hit all the right notes. Again, there's been a lot of praise for that speech over the last 24 hours. We are seeing now movement in the House this morning. McHenry, who of course is the acting speaker, has said that if there is a need for additional funding, they will find a way to put a bill on the floor of the House. So we've had a lot of questions about this because obviously there are questions about what Hakeem Jeffries could do as the minority leader in light of the circumstances that we are facing right now. And I want people to really grasp the fact that there is some movement. All right. I don't know. Okay. So let me just back up for a second. I want people to understand how this works in the House. There is this thing called the Hastert rule, very unfortunately named because Denny Hastert was, as we all know, a child sex abuse predator. But when he was the Speaker of the House of Representatives, there was a rule that he put in place that no bill would be brought to the floor of the House without a majority of the majority in favor of it. All right. And this has been a rule under which the House has functioned for decades now. Okay. One of the things that I think is really critical for folks to understand is that while that rule has always been implemented, it is an unwritten rule. Okay. So there are some rules in the House of Representatives that are written rules. We have more to say about that this morning. There are other rules that are not. All right. And one of the things that I want people to grasp is that there actually are ways in which some of this can be moved around in an emergency kind of situation. All right. And one of the things that apparently Hakeem Jeffries has been investigating and others have been investigating is whether or not a minority leader could put a bill on the floor of the House, notwithstanding the Hastert rule. And I think there's some discussion about that happening today. All right. There has been a joint resolution entered this morning condemning the attacks. That is a bipartisan resolution that has been entered, but it has not been brought to the floor. All right. And, one of the things that that I think we need to understand as well, as I've said over the last 2 days, is that the chaos in the House of Representatives right now puts everyone in a very dangerous position worldwide, as well as America. But I do think that Jeffries is trying to find a way around it. It sounds like McHenry is trying to find a way around it. And McHenry did make a statement this morning that if there's a need, they'll find a way to do it. So I don't know what that looks like, but I do think people should be aware that there is a great deal of fluidity right now, to say the least, in the way in which there could be movement in the House to put a bill on the floor to fund future military support to Israel, or for that matter, to Ukraine. All right. So I think everybody's got to kind of like stay tuned. Now, the House Speaker's race is still an absolutely chaotic mess. And, there was a set of rules that were proposed last night by Chip Wood that are just I don't even really know how to describe it. In addition to the fact that the rules had a duplicative rule in it that wasn't edited out, which is just like profoundly unprofessional, and also throws the whole rules procedure into question, because subsequent sections don't reference prior sections, and it's a mess. All right. But one of the things that people should be aware of is that they've got this really weird set of rules as well now that say that if above a certain amount, above 185 people support one candidate for speaker, but it's below the 217 version majority, then there's got to be a back and forth on the floor of the House, which is going to take forever. And then there's an anonymous voting procedure. In the midst of all of this, I will point out that the entire Democratic caucus has once again put Hakeem Jeffries' name into play as potential speaker candidate, and there's no indications that there's going to be a deviance from that. All right. There's a meeting that has been ongoing since 10 a.m. DC time, so 7 a.m. Pacific time this morning, behind closed doors of the Republican caucus concerning potential speaker candidates. There are noises being made that they're trying to avoid a messy floor vote, but there's literally no way that it's going to happen. There have been people giving interviews this morning saying that there's a 2% chance that there's going to be a single floor vote today to nominate a speaker. And I think we're looking at an extremely drawn out, very chaotic process over the next few days to try to get this done. I wish it wasn't so, and I think that while I continue to be, somewhat optimistic about the fact that there are moderate Republicans. Again, put that in quotes. Go watch every broadcast I've done over the last 5 days if you have any debate about what I mean by moderate. Those Republicans who are from Biden majority districts may just get fed up with this process. And I think that there's a lot of urgency in the current moment that may even lead to that possibility being more possible than less. All right. But I do want folks to understand that, there needs to be a resolution here, and it's more important now than it has ever been. And the easy solution to that is Hakeem Jeffries. It's the only way out that leads us to a stable form of leadership in the House of Representatives at a moment where it is so gravely needed. Okay, so that's what's happening in the speaker's race. And again, there's going to be ongoing developments about that all day. If there's a need for me to go live with an emergency broadcast this afternoon, you all know I'm going to do it. Just please be advised that, again, this is a reason why there is so much, it's so problematic to have fascists running a single party inside America and, essentially creating chaos wherever they go. Because at moments like this, what the world needs and what we need is consistent leadership that gets funding on the table as soon as humanly possible. Yeah. Liz, that's good to hear that there are local Republicans jumping ship. I'm glad to hear it. All right. So the other thing that's happening in the House of Representatives over the last 24 hours is that a superseding indictment has dropped for George Santos that includes things like credit card fraud, using his donors' credit cards. That includes identity theft of his own family members in furtherance of his campaign. This morning, he has stated that he is not going to resign, that he is denying every aspect of the indictments, and that he's going to run for re-election. New York Democrats have put an expulsion motion into play this morning to expel him from the caucus. I want people to understand that and to expel him from the House. I want people to understand that that's not likely to pass. It's really disturbing and devastating the extent to which the GOP just continues to carry water for this guy. I shared a story this morning on the feed the last time. So many folks don't know that, when you're going to court in the Southern District of New York or really any other jurisdiction, oftentimes there are overlapping dockets. So there's a criminal docket first and a civil docket second. And you all know that I handled civil matters in federal court for the vast majority of my career, along with some state stuff. But often I would show up to court for a civil matter that was docketed and the criminal docket would still be going on. And the last time that I actually witnessed a criminal sentencing in the Southern District of New York, it was a sentencing for exactly these kinds of allegations. It was a credit card fraud case, slightly different aim. It was someone who had stolen a bunch of credit cards and had bought concert tickets and the like, and then resold them for a profit. And then, identity theft, similar allegations. And this was a first-time offender, not somebody who'd ever been accused of other crimes, unlike George Santos. This kid was sentenced to 5 years straight out of the box. So, again, this is not something that in ordinary circumstances would end someone's political career, and it would land someone in prison. And it's probably going to land him in prison, to be honest about it. But I do think folks should be aware that the GOP is still continuing to endorse this guy. They're not doing anything to remove him. And yes, they have a very slim majority in the House, but fundamentally, this is an incredibly dangerous situation. He's not somebody who he's a sociopath. I mean, I'm just going to call it like it is. Like, I'm not a psychologist, but it's very obvious that he just has no moral boundaries of any kind, and has run roughshod over them from the very beginning of his life. So he does need to be removed, and he should actually. I'm going to be very curious to see what happens in another arraignment for these new charges, as to whether or not there is a serious possibility here of pretrial detention, given that it's like credit card fraud on behalf of his election campaign. I don't know. We'll have to see. All right. It is, well, actually, before I get to the Trump trial, let's just talk about a motion that Jack Smith filed in front of Judge Chutkan yesterday, which is a very interesting motion. A motion has been filed by Jack Smith's team asking for the defense in the election case in D.C., the election overthrow case in D.C., whether or not they're going to be relying on an advice of counsel defense. Okay, so one of the things that has sort of been floated here is that Trump may claim that he was given bad legal advice, and that he followed that legal advice, and for that reason, he has an affirmative defense against the conduct that is alleged. Now, I will say that I think an advice of counsel offense here is incredibly grim in the prospect of it actually succeeding. All right. I don't think that, in light of all the evidence we have of what Trump knew and what he was doing and his active involvement in it, and the fact that people told him that the election was legitimate and they told him that he didn't have the votes, and there's repeated testimony in front of the January 6th committee to the effect that he was told over and over and over again that the claims that he was making were false. Okay. I don't think, and he was told that directly. All right. It wasn't like his lawyers gave him a memo and he didn't know any better. Because usually an advice of counsel defense is like, your lawyer says something is legal. You have a memo that says that. You don't talk to anybody else. You follow your lawyer's advice, right? It's like the lawyer tells you not to fix the sidewalk in front of your house because you don't really have any liability if somebody gets hurt. You don't fix the sidewalk and somebody like dies, right? And you're prosecuted for something like, manslaughter, then you've got a legitimate advice of counsel defense. All right. And that's a very speculative situation I'm adding anyway, because it would probably just be negligence. But leaving all of this aside, what I want to say about this is that, this is not a traditional advice of counsel circumstance where that defense would be likely to succeed. However, what Jack Smith is asking is that Trump state affirmatively, one way or another, by early December, whether or not they are relying on an advice of counsel defense, because they're going to seek additional discovery here in the event that that's the case. Now, one of the things that I want people to just be aware of, would the advice of counsel defense call for the waiver of attorney-client privilege? Well, that's a really good question, all right? Because one of the things that you would ordinarily have to disclose in the event that you were seeking an advice of counsel defense were the communications between you and your lawyer, all right? So there's usually room for a limited waiver in that case. I'm going to say here already, though, is that we had this ruling out of Fulton County yesterday that denied Ken Chesebro's motion to keep the memos that he wrote that were foundational to this out of, he was denied. He sought to keep those memos out of evidence, and that motion was denied on the basis that the attorney-client privilege had been waived because of the crime fraud exception. All right. And the similar sort of counts that are in play here are at issue. Right. And again, I'm just going to point out, you have no attorney-client privilege if you are circulating a memo that goes beyond the attorney-client privilege relationship. You have no attorney-client privilege if you're engaged in a crime with your attorney. You have no attorney-client privilege if you are sharing things that have been shared with you by your lawyer with others. All right. So there's not going to be any legitimate attorney-client privilege here in play, all right? And I think that it's a very weak defense. But the point of what Jack Smith is trying to do is to make sure that he can get additional evidence, and that may include materials that would otherwise be subject to the attorney-client privilege. So we'll have to see how this goes. But I want to point out that, things are proceeding apace toward a March 4th trial date in Judge Chutkan's courtroom right now, and this is one aspect of that. All right. Okay. Other brief things that people should be aware of, speaking of Fulton County, is that there were papers filed yesterday by Fani Willis's team asking for fundamentally extraterritorial process to make sure that Lin Wood, Ronna Romney McDaniel, and Alex Jones would be available to testify in the Chesbrough Powell trial. Again, I have to say I did have my own Schadenfreude moment. I think that there are really interesting potential examinations to come, particularly of Ronna Romney McDaniel at this moment, because we know that the RNC, this has not been talked about a lot recently, but at the time, around January 6th and preceding January 6th, there was a lot of discussion about the fact that the RNC was on board with all of this. And, it's one of the reasons why the RNC's participation in all of this has always raised from the beginning very serious questions about the RNC's legitimacy and Ronna Romney McDaniel's role in all of this. So, one of the things that I just want to point out here is that we still don't know who might have flipped and cooperated with Fani Willis's team. Lin Wood has put out a statement this morning saying that he spoke yesterday with the prosecution, it was a really weird statement because it said, I used to be all in, but then I came to my senses. Like, I'm paraphrasing here, but it was basically that kind of a statement. I have to say that I think Lin Wood has flipped. And I have said this before here. And I think the statement as it stood was a kind of CYA gesture without saying that he had flipped, that sort of indicated that he had flipped. So we don't know what the details are around this. But I'm just going to add as well that, there are really serious considerations also about how Alex Jones and the right-wing media bubble are implicated in this as well, because we know that Alex Jones was having conversations with some of the senior leadership on the Trump campaign. We know that he had conversations apparently with Chesbrough and Powell, and he said yesterday that he's not going to testify, that he's going to fight it, and that if he's called to testify, he's going to plead the fifth, which did not work out very well for him in the trials involving Sandy Hook. But all that said, he's not a defendant in this case, but that also doesn't mean he might not be at some point. I have to remind everybody that superseding indictments are still possible. And I also just want folks to kind of be very mindful of the fact that this conspiracy, as broad as it is alleged in Fani Willis's case, we still don't know the outer limits of it. And I have to point out that for the people asking about Roger Stone, the pardon that he received from Trump only extends to federal crimes. It does not extend to anything related to Georgia. And so the issue, I think, with regard to Roger Stone is the nexus of his connection to Georgia. Because if he himself was not directly involved in trying to overthrow the Georgia election results, there are questions about whether or not jurisdiction could extend to him as a criminal defendant. All right. So that's more likely to be the issue of what's happening there. All right. It's day 7 of the Trump trial in New York State, as if what I've talked about already isn't enough. Today, we are hearing from the primary risk assessor at Deutsche Bank concerning his involvement in granting loans to Donald Trump on the basis of the fraudulent financial statements. I have to say that, there are moments where I have really questioned how Deutsche Bank could not have known what they were doing. And we know that certain things were flagged and overridden in various ways in which the requests for loans, the loan applications were processed. But I think the details of this are going to be really interesting to learn. And, Deutsche Bank has been involved in a lot of things and has paid a lot of fines in recent years concerning their failure to abide by financial regulations. And I they've been accused of money laundering. They've been accused of various conduct in relation to Russian oligarchs. You get to Deutsche Bank and you start to get much deeper into the story of Trump and how he has financed his businesses over the years. So this is going to be something to watch as it unfolds today. Just to answer the question, Matthew, about paying the Sandy Hook family. So we all know there were enormous judgments, hundreds of millions of dollars in judgments against Alex Jones in the last year concerning his absolute Sandy Hook denialism and the damage that it did to the families themselves and the harm that it caused them and the violence that they suffered as a result. Execution on a judgment is something that we've talked about here quite a bit. All right. I just want to point out that even were it not on appeal, Alex Jones has attempted to declare bankruptcy in order to evade payment of these liabilities directly, and he's not been successful so far in doing that. But there's a lot of dominoes still to fall in the execution on those judgments. Essentially, he's been put in a position right now, though, where any money that he earns is going to have to go to those families for the rest of his life. The question now is just how the courts are going to get access to it. So just stay tuned on that. And, I know there's a lot of frustration about those damages not having been paid yet. But he is, in some sense, a very classic civil defendant who's attempting to evade payment. And the justice system will do its work on that front. There are very specific means to access assets and forfeiture. And even if you declare bankruptcy, there are procedures in bankruptcy. I have to remind everybody, I was involved in the Trump third bankruptcy concerning the Atlantic City casinos in what was called an adversary proceeding, which is where various creditors fight over who should have access to the assets in a form of hierarchy. That is a procedure that is usually underway when someone declares bankruptcy, including civil plaintiffs rather, who are owed civil judgments. So we have a ways to go on this, and I want people to understand that process is underway. All right. Okay. I think that's enough for today. I do want, to remind everybody here that, again, there have been moments where news cycles have been as upsetting to me as they are today. I think family separation was one of them. And there have been various things that have happened over the last 8 to 10 years and in the history of America that, and the history of the world, that have been as upsetting as what we're witnessing today, but there aren't many of them. I just really want folks to take care of themselves. I mean, I think that's the best advice that I can give. I want to remind everyone to please make sure that you are taking care of people in your community, that you are taking care of people in your own family, that you are not subjecting yourself unnecessarily to traumatic video footage, and that you're doing everything that you can to stabilize yourself and your central nervous system and your families and the people that you care about as we all watch all of this unfold. I'm very concerned about escalation right now. I'll just be really candid about this. I think that the involvement of other actors and nation states in the region raises really serious international concerns about escalation right now. And I'm worried. I'm just going to be honest. I'm really worried about it. And all that said, I'm going to say what I said yesterday, which is that at this moment in time, there's not much that any of us as individuals can do about it. I think we should all be profoundly grateful that President Biden is in the White House and not anyone else. And I trust that the Democrats are working in array to do whatever can be done here to try to assist and to de-escalate, because what we fundamentally need right now is de-escalation. And I want to just encourage everyone, please take care of yourselves. I'm going to do the same today, by the way. My plan for today is to, I have some work I have to do on behalf of some clients on our leadership and political consulting side of the business. But beyond that, I'm really planning on logging off today as much as possible. Okay. So much love to all of you. Please like this video. Please subscribe if what the work that we're doing here is helping to support you and to keep people aligned and hopefully at least as grounded as we can be in these incredibly difficult times. Please make sure that you share this video if you would care to with others. And of course, I'm going to remind you all that if you have questions or you want support, you can always become a subscriber, a paid subscriber over at patreon.com/resistancelive. You can ask questions for 2 hours in advance of every broadcast. We do have a progressive coffee hour every Sunday morning at 8:30 Pacific, 11:30 Eastern, which is much more of a sort of like community gathering where I answer questions about everything. And it tends to be a lot less about like political breaking news and much more about like supporting one another and various ways of handling trauma, and all sorts of other issues. So if you're not a member over there already, please consider doing it. It also financially helps to support myself and the team behind the scenes as we continue to do this important work. We're almost approaching the beginning of year 8 of being here. We're hitting our 7th year anniversary in January of active broadcasting. So that propels us into the 8th year of the work. So I'm really grateful to all of you. As always, very grateful to our ongoing subscribers. Thank you for being here. Please take care of yourselves. Lots of love to all of you. Lots of love to all of our affected community members. And I will see you all here at regular time tomorrow. All right. Thanks so much, everyone. I'll see you then. Okay. Bye.